Hello, this will be a video where I create a European power supply replacement for the Nintendo Satellaview, the Japanese only peripheral for the Super Famicom SNES, which basically allowed you to download and play games of the Japanese broadcasting network. I won't explain all the details about the Satellaview, what it is, in this video. You have to look it up on your own. But obviously it doesn't work anymore, but you can still get it to power on, and I think it looks cool. So we will do this anyway. Now with this unit I didn't get a power supply. Either way it would have been a 100 volt power supply intended for use in Japan. And here in Europe we use 220 to 240 volts. So I would have been in need to use a step-down converter. So in any case, I think it's a good idea to replace it with something more modern. The Satellaview is a bit special when it comes to power. It doesn't get sufficient power from the Super Famicom extension port alone, and in normal cases, when using this back in the days, you would also have needed to power this AV selector. This was needed because you mixed the AV signal. You have AV in and out. You mixed that with the signal from the broadcast so that you could get voiceovers and arrange music and stuff like that when playing the game. So this is how that was achieved. And this was designed so that you would only need one power supply to power everything. So you would originally have plugged the DC power here. This cord here you would plug into the Satellaview. And you see you have a DC pass-through going on here. You see DC in and DC out. And you would use this L-shaped plastic thing to get the power to pass through into the Super Famicom itself. So with everything additional going on here, that explains why you need a bit more juice than you have on your original Super Famicom power supply. The Super Famicom uses, I think, 850 milliamps, whereas the Satellaview power supply is like 2.5 amps. Now, today there is little need for using any switch box, and we also want to use the RGB signal from the Super Famicom, which you can't use with the AV selector because it's designed for composite video only. But you can just plug the power straight into the Satellaview without the switch box altogether, which is what we will be doing here. The original Satellaview power supply is a bit non-standard. First of all, it's using this huge barrel connector, which I believe is the same as the one used on the American SNES, for example, with its outer diameter of 7.4 millimeters. Depending on where you live, you might have an easier time sourcing this plug. But yeah, it is a Nintendo proprietary plug, I believe, so a bit tricky to replace. And it's also using 8 volts, which is a bit unusual. You can probably get away with it just fine using a 9 volt adapter, seeing that the original Super Famicom adapter is 10 volts, and you can just use a 9 volt DC adapter for that one. I think it's within tolerance for the regulator. Now I actually managed to find a power supply which is outputting 8 volts, so I will be using that one. This is also 3 amps, which is a bit above in specification for the Satellaview. As I mentioned, the old power supply is 2.5 amps, but there is really no problem in using a higher amp, seeing that the system will only consume as much as it needs to. So rather be on the high note than, slightly below. So to summarize, we need a center positive polarity, 8 volts, 2.5 amps, and we need a barrel connector that is of a larger proprietary size of 7.4 millimeters in outer diameter. Okay, so I do have several options regarding the barrel connector. I could opt to just cut the cord from the AV selector and repurpose that plug, but I want to avoid that if possible. I might find some future use for the AV selector, whatever that might be. But I did have an idea earlier. I could, if you see the backside of the Super Famicom, it uses a typical plug, 5.5 millimeter barrel connector. It looks like this, and it's very typical, and it's used by a wide variety of different consoles, the European NES, Mega Drive, etc. And if you look at the female type for that plug, you can see that it kind of matches the dimensions of the jack here. This is a plug adapter suited for a 5.5 millimeter plug, and if you get rid of the plastic, if you carve up the plastic, it will look like this, and you can see that it fits very well in the jack. So with this extension cord thingy here, I will try to carve this up some and make it into a plug. If it works, then it's a pretty great solution, I think, because those type of plug adapters, extension cords or whatever, are much easier to come by than the Nintendo barrel plug. As you can see, I've made a small mark on the connector, so I will try to match the original plug as close as possible. Now this is what I ended up with. It didn't take much effort. The plastic was pretty soft. All I needed was a sharp knife, and it came off pretty quickly. I can see that it fits very nicely. So I think this is a pretty solid solution. As a proof of concept, I can just check for continuity. You can see that it makes contact. If you're paying attention, you can see that it's actually reversing the polarity, and that's nothing to be worried about, because the Super Famicom uses negative polarity and the Satellaview positive. So somewhere along the lines there has to be a polarity switch. So this is nothing strange. I have cut the cord on the adapter that I will be using, and now I'm doing a continuity test to determine which part of the cord is positive and negative. And I can see that the positive side is the part of the cord with the white stripe on it. So I can use that as a help when soldering the plug. I'm doing a similar thing with the extension cord that I will be sourcing the plug from. And I can see that the center part of the plug is connected to the red wire, or the part of the cord with the red stripe on. That will also be handy to know when doing the soldering. I'm preparing the soldering iron, put some flux on the copper contacts, and I'm using some shrinking tube. I won't show you the actual soldering because I need both my hands, but you get the idea. You know how this usually works. Alright, so this is the end result. We will try this in a bit. Everything is plugged in. We will try to power on the system, and it works. Do we have the power LED on the Satellaview also? Yes, we have. Nice.
Cool.
As you can see, it's working. Still no practical need for the Satellaview, but yeah, it works.